In December 2022, the founder of Ola Electric put out a tweet that said that by August 2023, the Ola S1 would be India's best-selling scooter, petrol or electric. Clearly, that hasn't gone to plan, and instead of selling the required 2 to 3 lakh units per month, Ola's sales have now dwindled down to about 10,000 units or less. So, the scooter game hasn't worked out, but perhaps this will make the difference. This is the Ola Roadster X, and it's not only Ola's first motorcycle, it's also the first product that they have fully designed and developed from scratch. Because remember, the S1 came from a Dutch startup called Itergo and was then re-engineered by Ola. Now, to answer whether this is the product that will change Ola's fortunes, we spent over a month with it and covered nearly 900 kilometers within Mumbai city to give you the answer. And there's a lot to talk about. Let's start with the way it looks. Now, design is a really subjective thing, so I will leave it to you to decide whether you think this is a nice looking motorcycle or not. But what I can tell you is that it doesn't make a great first impression, because when you look at it up close, there are a number of quality issues that stand out. For one, there are uneven panel gaps pretty much all over the place. Especially this one under the seat. No matter how much you try and close the seat well, there's a large unsightly gap out there. We even removed the charger which is housed under the seat to see if that was the problem, but even then the gap was pretty much the same. Then you look further around the place and you'll notice that the swing arm is really thin and small. It's very thin for a motorcycle that has this sort of performance. We're talking about 160cc levels of performance. You'll also notice quite cheap and basic looking bolts all over the place, especially the bolts for the top of the fork. The fork itself looks really skinny, and the switch gear doesn't have a very good feeling to it. Feels really quite basic. Most of all though, I'm not happy with the display on this bike. It looks rather basic. It's a simple LCD display. Now, to its credit, the information that's displayed there is mostly quite easy for you to read in terms of speed and trip information and things like that. But there is one very strange quirk or even a glitch in there, and it's in the way the range is displayed. Now, there are 3 riding modes: Eco, Normal and Sport. When the battery is full, if you see what the displayed ranges are, it's strange that the Eco mode display is actually the lowest of all 3. The reality behind it is that it seems like this display cannot show you the number 2. For example, here you can see that the Sport mode range is 148, Normal mode range is 169, but weirdly Eco mode range is just 13 kilometers. That's because it should have been 213, but the display can't seem to show you the number 2. When you're riding, you'll actually watch that number get lower and lower, and it finally jumps from just 0.1 kilometers all the way back up to 199 kilometer range. The glitches don't just stop with the bike, and it looks like Ola hasn't updated its app for the Roadster because it still calls this bike a scooter. We also notice that it sometimes says that the bike is on charge even when it isn't. Now, one of the areas where I think this motorcycle does quite decently is in its riding position. It's just simple, no-nonsense commuter comfort. Your feet are fairly forward set, not forward like a cruiser, but not rear set at all. Upper body is nice and upright, and this is a comfortable riding position, except for the fact that the seat feels like the foam just has no support in it. For the first 15-20 minutes, the comfort is just fine, but after that you start to notice that the seat isn't giving you much support, and if you're on a long commute, 40 minutes, 1 hour, like my daily commute is, this thing really starts to get quite uncomfortable and you kind of can't wait to get off the bike. It's a simple thing. Ola could have just made this a much more comfortable bike with just some better quality seat foam. Another quality thing that stands out in not such a good way is the charging flap for the fast charging that you can use via Ola's charging network. Very plasticky, very flimsy feeling, doesn't look good and definitely doesn't feel good to use. Charging is a little bit slow for an EV like this. You get a 750 watt charger and there's a special place for it under the seat, which is nice, so you don't have to carry it around in a backpack. The charger is also removable if you want to, but we don't see any reason for you to remove it. This charger, in our experience, Ola says 5.9 hours from 0 to 80%. We found 7 to 8 hours for a full charge. That is quite slow, so you've got to account for plenty of time for this battery to charge back up. Right, so that's how the Ola Roadster looks and feels, but what about the way it performs? Now, on paper, there is strong performance, and in certain situations, that performance is really quite good. You have a mid-mounted motor, peak output of 11 kilowatts, 50 odd Newton meters of torque, sends power to the rear via chain drive, and when the battery is full, this thing is really quite quick. In our tests, 0 to 100 is faster than most of the air-cooled, oil-cooled 160cc bikes, and it's only things like the XSR and KTM Duke 160 that are actually quicker than this. So the performance is there. But it's inconsistent. Let's start with the way it rides. Now, when the battery is full, the bike freewheels nicely. It feels gentle and predictable on the throttle. The three modes, like I mentioned earlier, sport mode is really quick and reactive. And like we noticed with the S1 scooter, when you shut the throttle in sport mode, it still tends to surge forward a little bit. Not a nice feeling, but it's something all Olas have done in our experience. Normal mode is very usable. It takes you all the way up to 80 kilometers per hour. And it's the mode I find myself spending most time in. Eco is just too dull and too slow for life in a big city like Mumbai. The top speed is capped at 42 kilometers on the display, and it's not something I would use unless the SOC was really low and I had no choice. Sport mode will show you a top speed of 125 kilometers per hour, but our V-Box tells us that that's actually really optimistic, and the true top speed is 109 when it's showing you 125. Now, all of this applies for when the battery state of charge is high. The moment you drop below 90%, suddenly regen kicks in. Now, there is a mobile app and you can choose to turn the regen off via the app, but we find that it still seems to work. The regen still comes on. And when the regen comes on, the throttle calibration completely changes. Suddenly, it feels a lot more abrupt and inconsistent on throttle openings, throttle closings, and there is no predictability to the way this bike rides. For example, I found that when you accelerate in normal or sport mode at say 70 kilometers an hour, feels really quite different to when you accelerate in the same mode at 50 or 40 kilometers an hour. It also varies widely based on the state of charge. Like I said, in our test 0 to 100, we got about 17 seconds, but that was at 90 odd percent SOC. When we did the same test at 50% SOC, the 0 to 100 time was 21 seconds. And when the battery drops down to about 30% SOC, sport mode starts to feel like what normal mode used to be when the battery was full. So the overall experience is that this is a constantly changing riding experience. And I find that you can't ride this bike subconsciously. You know, most motorcycles, once you're used to them, you can just ride naturally. With the Ola, you're always thinking about what your input is from your hand and then how the bike is reacting. So it's not a very calm riding experience, especially when you're in tightly packed traffic that's all moving together, which is very normal in Indian big cities. I find that it's also not easy to hold a steady throttle. Let's say you want to sit at 70, 75 kilometers an hour on a highway. It's constantly making adjustments and it's just not comfortable. The only way to ride comfortably in that state is to put on the cruise control and let the bike hold that steady throttle for you. So that inconsistency really does affect the riding experience, and it makes it quite annoying to ride this bike for long periods of time. The final thing that we noticed when it comes to performance, and this is something that we have experienced with other Ola scooters that we've ridden in the past, is that it can offer you a lot of performance, but it can't do it for very long. When we were out testing this bike, after a few acceleration runs, it gave us a warning and it restricted us, took us out of sport mode, put us into normal mode until the bike cooled down. This is something we've experienced in the past with the S1 as well. So there is performance and you can access it, but only for a short period of time. What about the other vital aspect of an EV? Range. Now, there are multiple battery pack options available. We have the Roadster X Plus, which is the second highest version of the Roadster that you can get. The top version is a 9.1 kilowatt hour battery pack. This one is 4.5. The range is actually not bad. In our tests, in normal mode with gentle but normal riding, not going too slowly, we covered 130 kilometers. And even if you use a mix of the riding modes, you go a little fast, you cover some distance, you should still realistically get 100 kilometers of range out of this EV. So that is not bad at all. So that's what the Ola's motor and battery is like. And in terms of its EV aspect, not really impressive. But what about traditional motorcycling things like comfort, handling and braking? Unfortunately, it's not really much of a better story there either. The very first impression when you ride the bike is that the steering feels strangely sluggish and heavy. This is just a 130 kilo motorcycle, but you have to put in effort to turn the steering from left to right, and it does feel like a heavy handling thing at low speeds. Then there's the suspension. Now, at lower speeds and over smaller bumps, it's all right. It sort of gets the job done. But the moment you hit a big bump, it can smack through its travel at both ends in quite an alarming way. And ever since I experienced that one time, I was extra careful with this bike when encountering potholes in a way that I'm not usually so careful with other motorcycles. Maybe it's that skinny swing arm playing on my mind, but it's not a bike that likes to be ridden through bad roads at speed. There's also a strange clunking sound that comes off the front end when you hit a bump. It's this clear cut sound, which again just doesn't do anything for your confidence, and it sort of makes you keep the speed slower on this bike. The one positive side of riding this thing slower is that the brakes aren't really very good. You get a rear drum brake, which on a motorcycle with this level of performance should have had a rear disc. It is dull and vague feedback at the front and a very long brake lever travel for the rear. So the braking distances in our test aren't great. This thing takes longer distances to stop from 60 kilometers per hour compared to most electric scooters that we've tested, but it's also the feedback that's not very good. And then there's this one strange alarming glitch that we've experienced sometimes. Now, all Ola EVs and quite a few Chinese EVs tend to cut off the motor the moment you touch the brakes. On electric scooters with small wheels, that's a big problem because they don't have the kind of stability that you want in traffic. So you would want to lightly drag the brakes on a scooter when you're weaving through traffic at a very slow speed. It gives you stability. The motorcycle has big wheels and it's not really a problem. It is stable, it's stable at high speeds, and it's stable and, like I said, slow steering at slow speeds. But what we've noticed is that sometimes when you use the rear brake and you release the rear brake, the motor still doesn't work. It just doesn't come back to life. And what I think is happening is that Ola is probably using the brake light switch down there to let the motor know that it needs to be deactivated when the brake is pressed. And there's something sticky about that switch. And sometimes you press the rear brake, you release it, you accelerate, it won't accelerate. You got to tap the brake again and then it comes back to life. And that is not a nice thing to happen, especially when you're in densely moving traffic and you want the bike to react as it should react. To conclude, we find this bike surprisingly disappointing, and it's just not at the level that you would expect from an Indian manufacturer in 2026. And that disappointment is purely at a product level because we haven't even talked about Ola's infamously poor after-sales support for existing customers. Even when compared to the Ola S1, that scooter had plenty of issues, but right out of the box, it never felt cheap and built to a price in the way that this does. Now, on the topic of price, it's hard to give you a clear price because since late 2025 to now, the price has fluctuated between 1.3 lakhs and 93,000 rupees. That's because Ola has been offering big discounts on a very regular basis. In March alone, the company offered 4 different discounts. There was the Holi Mahotsav, the Navratri Mahotsav, and 2 different iterations of End Ice Age campaigns. And on that note, if Ola genuinely does want to end the Ice Age, this is not the way to do it. And having experienced it for quite a while now, this is not a motorcycle that we can recommend in its current form, and it really does need quite a bit of work.